can we turn it down a tiny bit? Testing. Down a tiny bit. Testing. Yeah, that's perfect.
Good morning, everybody. Do you want to take your seats and we can get started? Okay, welcome to the 2016 NCC. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here, and hopefully it'll prove to be a great 2.5 days. Before I get started, Peter and I walked around, and when you get to be chair of this wonderful organization, one of the things you get to do is design a pin. And so I put my pin at your desk there, and if you want to just have a look at it, and I want to explain a little bit about it that I hope can sort of serve as a guide for the next 2.5 days. This is for people who know me. There's some colors in it. The green represents my time that I lived in PEI. The blue represents the time that I lived in Nova Scotia. The dark color represents the first curling club that I ever was a member of, is the Westville Curling Club, which is a coal mining town, and in the middle of their pin is a piece of coal, and so that represents sort of my roots. But the 3 rings actually represent the member associations, our staff, and our board of governors. And it's only when those 3 rings work together and come together that we can form Curling Canada. And if one of those links is not there, Curling Canada falls apart. So we're going to listen to inch by inch out there. Anyhow, that's the theme behind my pen, and I hope we can use that as some guidance at the next 2.5 days. That's what we really need to do to achieve anything, is for those 3 bodies to come together, because not one of them alone is Curling Canada. They are all Curling Canada. I'd also, at this time, like to, I look around the room, and as I alluded to last night, there's a lot of new faces and a lot of old faces, but there are some faces who are not here with us that I know, I look around the room. Chris Manouge is not here. Kim Warburton's not here. Joan. Terry's not here. Marion's not here. And it's sort of, I almost like to acknowledge all the contribution that they've done, even though they're not here. 2 other people are not here, the EDs. There's 2 people who've been here for a long, long time. Jeremiah Anderson, who back home, sometimes I treat him like a little brother, and sometimes it's a little brother who needs a kick in the butt. I was always allowed to give him one, but he's not here. Amber Holland is not here. And those are big personalities that are not in our room. And so I just like to, even though they're not here, would you guys join me in giving them a round of applause for all that they've done? So now, like I said, there's a lot of new faces, and so this is the time we go around, and hopefully by the end of the week, I'll get to know, I know most of you, but I don't know everybody. I met most of you last night, so I think I met Mitch, and I met Matt. And Matt, if I call you Mitch, that will be your name for the day. I can do that. Remember, I'm Obama. Anyhow, so we're going to go around the room and just get everybody to introduce yourself and what's your role. So we're going to start over here with this guy. Who's he?
Inch by inch, no. I'm Peter Inch. I'm Vice Chair of Curling Canada. I've been curling 42 years and from London, Ontario.
Scott Braley, CEO, Curl BC.
Paul Addison, the Chair of Curl BC Board of Governors.
Lena West, Board of Governors. I've done 3 years, 2 to go.
Ellen Johnson, President, Yukon Curling.
Peter Mackey, President, Nunavut Curling Association.
Kathy Hughes, Board of Governors. I'm from the province of Quebec and I've curled for 40 years.
Jean Lamaire, Président, Curling Québec.
Serge Brazeau, Curling Québec. Je curle à Saint-Lambert Curling Club.
Brenda Asmussen, Vice President, Alberta Curling Federation.
Joan Westgard, President, Alberta Curling Federation.
Ron Hutton, Board of Governors.
David Burpee, Vice President, New Brunswick Curling Association.
Catherine McLean, President, New Brunswick Curling Association.
Susan Curtis, Newfoundland Labrador Curling Association, President.
Harold Walters, Vice President, Newfoundland Labrador Curling Association.
Shirley Osborne, Board of Governors.
Harry Damon, Nova Scotia Curling Association President.
Kathy Dial, newly minted, Vice President, Nova Scotia Curling Association.
Patricia Yeski, President, Curl Sask.
Mitch Minkin, Vice President, Curl Sask.
Scott Comfort, Board of Governors.
Cheryl Ball, NWT Curling Association.
Janie Hobart, President, NWT Curling Association. Bonjour, Serge and Jean. I did tell you I would speak one word of French.
Well, that's a hard act to follow. Maureen Miller, are you supposed to say how long you've been here? Quarter Century Club, Board of Governors.
John Shea, Ontario Curling Association Chair.
Ian Tetley, Ontario Curling Association.
Steve Meunier, Northern Ontario Curling Association, Vice President.
Michael Chesky, Northern Ontario, President.
Resby Coots, finishing my first year on the Board of Governors. I'm just a prairie farm boy who will begin next fall my 60th year of curling, but I started very young.
Matt Piu, Vice President, Curl Manitoba.
Sam Antilla, President, Curl Manitoba. From Thompson, Manitoba, Bertwin Curling Club.
Cindy Maddock, Board of Governors. I curl out of Morden, Manitoba, and I was debating about telling you whether or not I started at a certain age or how many years, but Resby beat me by a little bit how many years he's curled, but I started at 8.
Amy Duncan, Executive Director, Curl PEI. Angela Hodson, President, Curl PEI.
Okay, way back to Jerry.
Jerry Peckham, Director of High Performance, Curling Canada.
ED, Yukon.
Marg Miranda, ED, New Brunswick.
Marc-André Robitaille, ED, Curling Quebec.
Mike Carson from Quebec, but starting my 10th year with the Masters Committee and 7th year as chairman of that committee.
Speaking of newly minted, Ashley Howard, Executive Director of Curl Sask.
Danny Lamoureux, Curling Canada, Director of Curling Club Development and Championship Services.
Gord McNabb, Interim Director of Event Operations.
Al Cameron, Director of Communication and Media Relations, Curling Canada.
Karen Wan, Manager of Event Financial Services for Curling Canada.
Helen Radford, Youth Feeder System, Curling Canada.
Steve Chenier, Ontario Curling Association.
Leslie Kerr, Northern Ontario Curling Association, Executive Director.
Craig Baker, Curl Manitoba, Executive Director.
Karen Ryan, Executive Assistant with Curling Canada.
Pat Ray, Chief Operating Officer, Curling Canada.
Kathy Henderson, Chief Executive Officer, Curling Canada.
Okay, and the guy behind the camera is the Director of Everything Technical, Glenn Van Gulik. I have a few housekeeping items that I wanted to bring to your attention. A lot of you in the room yesterday when I came to visit you and mentioned that there was going to be a slight change in our agenda. So on our agenda, we have scheduled at 4 o'clock a governance review committee. That is actually going to be put off until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. It's going to be a shorter session. In filling that spot at 4 o'clock, there will be a in-camera session with the two voting delegates and any EDs from the member associations, along with the board and our CEO and COO. So that will start at 4 o'clock. I've also been told to tell you there is coffee outside. Apparently there is a bathroom if you go up the stairs and around the corner, or something like that. I don't know how you get back. So hold it. Anyhow, okay, I'll stop being a fool. Just a few other things. The introduction of candidates standing for election to the Board of Governors will occur following the keynote address. This year we've changed the candidates' town hall to a less formal town square. The town square will take place tomorrow evening at 7:30. We certainly encourage everyone to attend and show support for those who have agreed to let their names stand for the positions on the Board of Governors. And those of you who have attended past NCCs will remember that we have a professional photographer to take a picture of all NCC participants, so we can upload that to our website. We plan to do that again this year, and just prior to the commencement of the AGM around 10:30 on Saturday morning. So please be in this room wearing the appropriate attire. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but I'm sure you guys will all figure out what the appropriate attire is. Best costume gets a prize. From the schedule prepared by the NCC Planning Committee. Oh, by the way, thank you to the NCC Planning Committee. They've done a wonderful job, so thanks. But they put together a full agenda, so if you're tired, you can blame it on them. We've allotted enough time, though, the next 2.5 days for the presentation, exchange of information and ideas related to the important issues we are dealing with right now. We will formally convene the business session on Friday afternoon, and then together decide which motions will go forward to the 2016 AGM. It's now time to introduce our keynote speaker. Dr. Richard Leblanc is a governance expert and consults widely on this subject to organizations, including not-for-profit and sport organizations. Because of his work with leading organizations and his ongoing research, he is always on the cutting edge of emerging developments in this area. His insights have guided numerous leaders of organizations through teaching, writing, and consulting. He is an award-winning educator, lawyer, consultant, and author, and has been described by faculty at Yale, Harvard, and the London Business School, and elsewhere around the globe as remarkable, and has been described as leading edge and groundbreaking by Fortune 500 leaders. He has recently received a teaching award as one of the top 5 university teachers in Ontario. He is also a strategic advisor to the Institute for Excellence in Corporate Governance at the University of Texas at Dallas, and has taught at Harvard, where he's received an instructor rating of 4.89 out of 5. Just be on the record that I've received a 4.89 record before, but it wasn't out of 5. He is currently teaching at the Schulich School of Business, where he has received awards for teaching excellence and merit. He is also a frequent media commentator. Richard adopts a framework for governance that, when adopted, strengthens governance effectiveness and accountability practices. He understands that governance policy needs to be practiced by first understanding roles and accountabilities of each party, whether they are governed or they are governed. And then looking at actions that support those separate roles and accountabilities, and looking at the current structure and mandate of Curling Canada and its member owners, Dr. Leblanc will outline best practices for the ways in which we constitute, communicate, and conduct our business, outlining benefits achieved and risk avoided, with a deep understanding of one's roles in mission delivery and a healthy respect for the role of others. He will utilize best practices theories combined with practical examples to illustrate such. I now ask you to welcome Dr. Leblanc.
Thanks, you. That was a really nice introduction. Thanks a lot. Thanks, you. That was a great introduction. I absolutely love this room. It's like a classroom, university classroom, but it's bumped up a level. I graduated from Cornwall Collegiate and Vocational School in 1984, and I've not been back to Cornwall since. I originally was from Sudbury, born in Sudbury, then went to Timmins, and then went to Cornwall. And I got a scholarship at U of T, and graduated with a BSc. And as you can tell, I'm overeducated. I spent almost 20 years collecting these credentials. I'm an academic, so my slides are dense. It's more of a course. I'm not going to talk about every single slide or every single issue. I'm here to stimulate over the next half hour, 35 minutes, provoke, criticize. I will incorporate FIFA governance reforms. I will incorporate the reforms into 6 sporting organizations that I've assisted over the last year, including the Canadian Olympic Committee. I'm going to talk about director responsibilities, and I'm not an expert in sport. I'm an expert in governance. But dare I say that there are legacy. I agree with everything that was mentioned earlier this morning. I'm just going to put my sort of layer on it. I look at 3 things. I look at independence of the directors. I look at competencies of the directors, and I look at behaviors of the directors. There's nothing in the next 30 minutes that I'm going to tell you that is academic. It's all practiced, including by sporting organizations. We are at the beginning of a transformational change in sporting governance caused by the Russian doping scandal and FIFA, and that will take time to trickle down to other organizations, present company excluded. Not-for-profits are under-regulated, and they have incredible freedom. And with freedom comes the potential for corruption, bribery, and shoddy governance practices. And I'm also going to tailor my presentation to some of the learnings for Curling Canada based on my research. So I did a bit of research on Curling Canada. My new book came out last week. It's called The Handbook of Board Governance, right here. If you Google The Handbook of Board Governance, you'll get it. And I've got 500 copies. If you want a copy, I'll sell you a copy at half price. There's also, and I gave this to Kathy, 20 questions for directors of not-for-profit organizations. And that's complimentary right here, so that you can get a PDF copy. Here's what I'm going to talk about today. Board dynamics, number 1. I usually say to audiences, put up your hand if there's an asshole on your board. And I'm not going to do that here. And about, and about 90, well, we're already started. And 90% of the hands go up. And then I say to the 10% of hands, guess what? So on every single board, I work with, in any given year, 20 to 30 boards a year. And part of what I do is an assessment. You all on your provincial and territorial boards and on the national board should be doing a regular governance assessment, a governance review. Now regulators are asking you to do peer reviews where you all assess each other. And when you do that in a sort of rigorous way, there's a whole continuum, right? It's like voting off the island. There's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, right? And what I want to see is 1/3 of the best directors, board, and committee chairs. And then I want to see 1/3, and then the bottom 1/3, I want to see younger, not in chronological age, but lesser tenured directors. When I see a mature, not in terms of maturity, when I see a mature director or a board or committee chair down there in the lower performing directors, then it's time to pull the trigger on that particular director. So having a regular review, and regulators have now asked for this for 20 years, regular board reviews, including reviews of individual director performance. Not all directors are equal. So I'm going to talk about best practices, competencies, and behaviors. Competencies. You should be using a competency grid to recruit your directors. The problem with appointing or electing directors is there's not enough control by Curling Canada in the selection of directors. So I'm going to give you a competency grid in a few minutes. I want to talk about fiduciary duty. Your duty as a director on the provincial board or the national board is not to the owners. It's not. It's to act, and this is the law. It is, and this is the Supreme Court, actually. It is to act with a view to the best interests of the organization, full stop. Now, more often than not, that includes owners. But when you get bumped up from a provincial board to a national board, this is where the dysfunction happens. is provincial appointees to the national board say, my job is to represent the interests of the province. It's not. If that is your mindset, you are a defective, poisonous director and should not be on the board. And I see this time and time again, particularly in sports. My job is to represent the interests of the province or territory. No, full stop. Your obligation is to represent the best interests of the national organization and international. And you're obligated to take a decision that might be adverse to the interests of the province or the territory that you represent, because you're not there to represent your province and territory. You're there on the board to act with a view to the best interests of the national organization. When you're on your territorial board, that's different. And sometimes directors can't make that mental mindset change. So two things. Your obligation is not to shareholders. Your obligation is not to customers. Your obligation as a director is to act with a view to the best interests of the organization. And there are two separate topics when you're a provincial versus a federal, national. And leakage, right? If you're leaking information, confidentiality of board meetings is confidentiality of board meetings. So directors tell me, well, I go and I report back to my province. No, you're not authorized. I think the remark was made earlier. You're an individual. Right? You should have proper channels and procedures for reporting. That's leakage. You've now breached your duty of confidentiality to the board. If you leave a board meeting and start communicating with the stakeholder that appointed you on the content of the board meeting or any informal communications, you're offside. Right? There are policies, at least there should be, for regular communication channels. So you get into trouble by adopting a stakeholder representation on a national board or leaking information. Composition and diversity, skill sets. I'm noticing a diverse audience. I don't see this in the corporate world. Kathleen Wynne announced, and this is not a political thing, this just happens to be the Premier of Ontario, that's it. I want to see and the finance minister was there, Charles Sousa, and the Minister of Women. I want to see diverse boards in Canada. 51% of boards in Canada don't have a single woman on the board. That's it. Those days are numbered. This steering committee, I'm on the steering committee. We have Vegas rules, by the way. What I say here doesn't go beyond the door. Where we're thinking is 30% all boards. Sporting organizations, not-for-profit, Crown boards. I know she came out with 40%. What we're thinking is 30%. If you have one director, if you have 0 directors who are female, 56% of Canadian boards have 0 directors who are female. You have to move to 1 director. If you have 1 female director, you have to move to 3 directors. All interviewees for corporate boards, 50% of the interviewees for the position have to be female. And another thing about diversity, it's not, and this is a major issue right now, it's happening in 49 countries. There's good academic research that women, the assumption by men is, what's the hormone that we have? Is it testosterone? Yeah. Why am I asking Kathy? The assumption is that men are hard chargers, they're going to ask tough. It's actually the opposite. Men tend to be conflicted because they're brought onto the board by virtue of personal and professional networks. They ask the weakest questions. Women tend to be recruited in a different manner. Women, particularly 3 women, will diversify and mitigate groupthink. Diverse boards make better decisions and are ultimately better for owners and for other stakeholders. So there's enough academic research now that regulators are acting. And regulators are saying we want to move from a referral, and this is the advice we give women, right? You want to get on a board, you have to network more. Imagine if you wanted to be a lawyer or a doctor, and that was the advice you got. You have to network with lawyers and doctors in order to become a doctor. Directorship is becoming professionalized. So we're moving from relationship-based recruiting to competency-based recruiting. And I would like to see a layer of competency-based recruiting in curling Canada. And I didn't see very much talked about. I think in sport, you get passionate, and I'm generalizing, but I think I'm accurate. You get passionate people who might be ignorant when it comes to governance. And I'm looking at these sporting organizations I've worked with, shocking ignorance, potential sexual misconduct, sexual assault, and I asked the governors, the directors, basic questions, and they just haven't done it. So I think it's important to upskill on governance. And I'm not trashing athletes, but athletes, would I go, if I never curled before, would I go and I didn't even understand the terminology? I'm an ignoramus, right? So if you're now going from one field to another field, There should be some sort of an obligation to sort of upskill and to understand what your roles and responsibilities are. I believe, based on what I saw earlier, that you are well on your way to establishing that. So orientation, education is just crucial. I would go further. I would say there should be independent director representation on all boards. Provinces, and this is what's going to happen, mark my words, provinces and territories and the federal. A couple of positions, completely independent. And this is starting now. It's starting from FIFA. Completely independent. I've got, for example, me. I'm ignorant. I've got absolutely nothing to do with curling. I bring a fresh set of eyes. I think boards, sporting boards can become myopic, where we've always done it this way, and this is the way we've always done it. You need a fresh set. In the real world, it's the complete opposite. The majority of directors have actually nothing to do with the business or the organization. Completely independent, including on committees. You should all have, the provinces and the national board, you should all have a proper committee structure, right? You should have a pay committee. It's okay to pay the executive director with stretch goals as well, aligned with the strategy of the organization. Risk, the audit committee, financial, right? If you're a curler, listen, it's okay to admit ignorance, right? You can learn. If I'm ignorant when it comes to financial, I'm a lawyer. Right? If I was placed on an audit committee, I would learn statement of cash flows, balance sheet, income statement, learn, upskill, right? What you don't want, you want to place people where they're skilled, and we'll get to the competency matrix in a few minutes. It's okay to be ignorant, but you get into a problem is when you have ignorant, and this is an overstatement, this is a harsh word, but it's true. When you get ignorant people on committees, and this happened in a not-for-profit recently, it was Ottawa. They had a doctor on the Ottawa Audit Committee of the hospital. He was a urologist. Is that a penis doctor? What does a penis doctor know? Why am I asking Lena? I'm going to testosterone and penis doctors. There was a urologist who sat on the audit committee. Okay, that's fine, but show me that you're financially qualified to sit on that audit committee. And regulators now are asking, what's your skill set, right? So if I go to your website, I should be able to see not just the picture. And sometimes I don't even see the picture. The law changed yesterday, right? Now all companies have to list the picture, the qualifications, the background, the skills of the individual director. So regulators now are becoming very aggressive. You all have skills, right? So I'm not suggesting in any way that you're unskilled. Not at all, right? But whatever your skills are, bring them out. So I, within 2 or 3 clicks of my mouse, land on your website, and I want to see the skills. The documents were mentioned earlier. I went to many of your curling websites. I just don't see it. I don't see basic position description for the chief executive officer, both provincial and federal. Position description for the chair. Position description for the committee chairs. Committee charters. Board guidelines. The regulators now have been asking for this for 20 years, and now they got tough yesterday. They said, listen, you have to have it. So document, document, document. Generally, a red flag for me is lack of documentation. I have yet to see an outstanding board that doesn't document, right? So put the documents, the code of conduct, right? Sporting organizations get into trouble with the code of conduct, which should cover sexual issues. Right? One sporting organization recently, I said, what's your biggest risk? The biggest risk is little girls, underage females, younger girls, and they're girls, touching. So the coach, this was another sport. The coach engaged, and I'm not suggesting this is occurring here. It tends to be fraud or sex. Those are the 2 sort of buckets that can harm you as a governor. So I asked the organization, I'm not going to name the sport. There was 2 sports involving very similar sexual issues. What's the code of conduct, right? Does everybody sign the code? Does everybody acknowledge? Well, we don't even have a code of conduct. If I'm the mother of the little girl or the father, where do I go to? If that person is a potential Olympic athlete and the coach is inappropriately touching, here's the key. How do I anonymously inquire about whether this should be happening or not? There's no whistleblowing mechanism. And in the 3 or 4 of the sports, and I'm not suggesting that that's the case here, but there should be, if Shirley is chair of the audit committee and I'm the mother of the little girl, there should be a protected, anonymous mechanism for me as not even the athlete, the stakeholder, the mother of the athlete, to inquire with Shirley about this type of conduct. So a code of conduct, a whistleblowing procedure, a conflict of interest statement, right? If you're sitting on a board, provincial, territory, or national, and you're a customer, supplier, you've got any business relationship whatsoever, you're conflicted. You're conflicted. It's not that you're a bad person, okay? You're conflicted. So there should be a policy to identify how you're conflicted, and by the way, it could be family members and it could be affiliates. So you need to have a comprehensive conflict of interest policy, which it's not that you're bad. In fact, it's that you're good. Some of the most effective directors are conflicted directors, but there needs to be a policy, a conflict of interest policy, to identify and manage the conflict. If your daughter is or son is in the sport, you're sitting on the board, you're conflicted by virtue of being a family member. So I'm doing three things here. I'm saying whistleblowing, code of conduct, and conflicts of interest. In my view, are immature in many sporting organizations. And you need to be on top of that. And all three, by the way, have reporting to Shirley on the audit committee. This does not go to the manager. This goes to the directors. The directors, the committee members go, so it's not through management, it's actually around management. This is where regulators are going. Roles, expectations, dysfunctional directors, and then board relations. And I want to say something about risk. It's huge, right here, and then I'm going to go to the next slide. Risk is huge. So regulators are saying to boards, including sporting boards, what are the risks of your organization? And for sport, I'm not an expert in sport, but here's what I surmise are some of the risks. Sponsorship, donations, stakeholder management, sexual, HR issues, fraud, reputation, social media. I recall the last time I spoke to a curling group, someone's picked up their cell phone and they said, we can be on the news in 10 minutes by virtue of this phone. And they're absolutely right. It used to be 2, 3, 4 days. Right now, it's instantaneous. Your brand can be adversely affected within minutes. So good boards are asking management teams, tell us our risks. Tell us what they are. Define them for us, right? Every board, every director in this room should approve what's known as a risk appetite statement, which is basically what are the risks, define them quantitatively and qualitatively, number one. Number two, what are the internal controls? Risk can be assumed, it can be transferred, it can be mitigated. 95% of risk is mitigated. What are the internal controls? So sex, the touching, what are the internal controls? I mentioned the code of conduct, background checks, right, on stakeholders. Code of conduct, background checks, whistleblowing policy are three just tremendous internal controls to mitigate sexual misconduct, potential sexual misconduct. So internal controls mitigate the risk. Show me the internal controls and show me that they're working, right? You can have a code of conduct, no one has seen it in years, right? There's no training on it. Yeah, we have a code of conduct. So the design and the implementation of the internal controls. Show me. You're the director. Show me, right? You're not micromanaging. You're saying, show me. I'm here. And by the way, you approve the risks, right? So every 6 months, every year, you should approve the risks, the internal controls, and the assurance of the risks. Where regulators are going with assurance is management doesn't assure the risks because they're assuring their own work. And management is, present company, not Kathy, management is disincented by implementing internal controls because they don't want to dominate themselves. And internal controls cost money. So this assurance is risk, internal audit, and compliance, some sort of function reporting directly to the committees without management in the room. I want to say that something about without management in the room. I will get to the next slide, by the way. This concept of executive sessions, I find, is immature in sporting organizations. Executive sessions, or in camera, is this, is you leave the room once every meeting. Once every meeting, management, staff leave the room. And it's just independent directors who discuss. Once every meeting, both at the committee level and at the board level. Leave the room. And if someone says, I need to take notes, no, you leave. So all staff leave. It's the one thing directors have said, regulators have actually gotten right, is this concept of in-camera sessions, where everybody leaves the room. So consider having that as a part of your agenda. And the agendas are set by the board and committee chairs, not by management. They are established by board and committee chairs. Okay, So these are all the defenses. We've never done it this way, it costs too much. All these are nice, but they're largely irrelevant. Governance now is a moving target, right? So get with the program, okay? So these are all the excuses that I've heard a million times before, none of which are relevant. This gives you an idea. My clicker, okay. These are some of the companies I'm drawing on. This is governance after the financial crisis, right? This is George Bush. He's actually, this is not photoshopped. He's actually holding the phone the wrong way, but he doesn't know that he's holding the phone the wrong way. So this gives you an idea of how aggressive the regulators are becoming in governance. And it all flows downhill. We've got a new chair of the Securities Commission, right here, Maureen Jensen. And she's implementing reforms as well. We've got OSFI, et cetera. We've got the sporting scandals up here. You recognize some of these pictures and names as well. So I'm called in by the board, and I make recommendations. It's typically the police, a judge, a regulator calls me in, and your life can be hell. Because if I'm a plaintiff's lawyer, I'm chasing you. There's another sporting organization, they approved an inadequate insurance policy. The athlete, I don't want to get too specific, I don't want to identify the sport, slid into something and hit his neck and became a quadriplegic. And it's directors now, their life is a living hell because of the distraction, the insurance for directors, not only for the organization. So this is an example of you, all of you, approve the insurance policy for the organization and you approve your own insurance policy. And I could not think of an area where directors, including me, are more ignorant than insurance. So another point, ask ignorant questions. I've interviewed probably 1,000 directors. The question I ask them, what's your greatest regret? You know what the greatest regret is? I didn't ask the question. If you have a question and you think it's ignorant, it's not ignorant. Your colleagues are thinking the same question. You remember that movie Columbo with the detective? Ask the question. You don't have to ask it in an intimidating way. You can ask it in a bumbling, humorous, but ask the question. Put up your hand and ask the question. That mitigates groupthink. So insurance, ask the question, right? What's the worst possible scenario that could occur in this organization? And show us that we are appropriately insured. Okay? And kick management out of the room at any time, right? If you don't think you're getting the straight answer or something needs to happen, have an executive session with management. So insurance, as an example, can really bite a director, and that's your job. That's what the government is holding you responsible for, is making these decisions. So what I'm here to say is, it's okay to be ignorant, but you can't be illiterate. You actually have to ask the question. Dysfunction. This was a sporting organization. This is what the chair of the board said to me. This was about 6 months ago. So poor dynamics affects donor. It affects reputation. It affects your personal brand. It also affects your health, right? If you're serving on a board, not-for-profit directors don't serve on the board for the money. They serve on the board to give back because they're passionate, they want to contribute, they want to feel valued, they want to make friends, they want to learn, camaraderie, etc. If you have a dysfunctional director on your board, that person is poison, okay? That person needs to be removed from the board. You need to conduct an assessment, identify the learnings, upskill the person or mentor, and if they can't, you need to push through it. Directors tell me, well, a board is like a family, right? And you've got this errant, rogue child. And it tends to be three things. It's words that are used, tone, micromanaging, and frequency. And that's all it takes is one director that will completely wreck a board. So push through it. Very important. Methodology, dynamics. I look at, this is busy, but independence, competency, behavior. Okay, so let's do these three, and then we'll open it up for questions. Independent directors, right? We want directors who are thinking with independence of mind. So you should have a conflict of interest policy. You should have a code of conduct, right? If you're captured by management or by a stakeholder, and that capture can be gifts, it can be pens, it can be vacations, it can be cigars, it can be sponsorship. You know, there's increasingly now anti-corruption where, I'm not saying this is the case, but the pin that was handed out, right? That's fine. A pen, right? If you're applying for a contract to a sporting organization, there is now what's called no gift policy, right? This dinner that I take you out for, if I'm trying to do business with the sporting organization or trying to have a contract, that could be construed as bribery. It's not price, quality, and service. So you got to be careful as a director to be not subject to undue influence by a stakeholder or an owner or even a manager, staff, right? Inappropriate relationships, right? Keep it professional, keep it independent, because your objectivity is being compromised. You are being worked as a director, and that can get you into trouble. And you say on the board, do you want to be, this is not a race thing, do you want to be black, gray, or white? Kathy is black. Kathy is an executive. So if the rest of the board is gray, you work for Kathy. You're not independent. You want enough white directors that are completely independent. Once you start going down that gray path of capture, of social, professional, camaraderie, right, you lose the ability to sort of back up, particularly with working boards, people that actually do the work, that are they're governors, but they actually are a working board. You're conflicted. You are gray, you're not white. So it's important to have a portion of directors that remain as neutral and objective as possible. Okay, that's all I want to say. Competencies. You should all be doing this, right? This is now the law. If you look at my not-for-profit model here, this is a regulator. This is a regulator saying, listen, we asked you to do this, you didn't do it, we're going to tell you what to do, right? And this is individual competencies. So this came from an Ontario regulator. You all should be doing this. So the parent board, the national board, when it says to the presidents of the territories and provinces who nominate directors, the national board needs to take greater control of the director nomination procedure. It should even have a nominating committee and be able to say to the provinces and territories, listen, we know our board best. We've done our competency analysis. Here are the desired competencies that we want in directors that you put forward. Let me repeat that. That's important. And the provincial board should be doing this as well. The national board, in receiving nominations, this type of competency review should be done. So that you get, and this is just competency, it's not behaviors, right? So that you affect the director selection process. Otherwise, you're vulnerable to special purpose directors or rogue directors if you don't do this, and that can wreck a board. And if you don't do the competency analysis. So what the government is saying is, do the competency analysis. You can marry democracy, which is the provinces proposing directors, with good governance, which is up here. And the provincial and territorial boards should be doing this as well. And you align the competencies with the board, and you do this on an evergreen basis. So when a director retires, after the end of the term, for example, then you know what type of skill set do we desire. How many people, just a show of hands, how many people do this? How many people have seen this? Okay, about 40% of you, good. So this needs to spread a little more broadly. This is an example of a board actually doing it, right? So this can be done on a napkin for the provinces and for the national board, right? What do we need? What do we need? What are the skills and competencies that we need in our directors? And ask management. They know, right? I ask management. Ask the management team. What would you, in an ideal world, what skills and competencies would you like to see on the board of directors? And they'll tell you, right? So take that into consideration as well. So every province, territory, and national should have a committee that does this, a nominating and governance committee. This is director evaluation. I talked about this earlier, right? This director was removed right here because there was a lot of red. You get a self-score, a peer board, peer self-gap, a board average, and this was an outstanding director right here. Okay, so this is an example of actually doing this. Behaviors. You should look at behaviors when you recruit directors, right? This is not from the professor's head, by the way. This is director associations that do this all over the world. This is the global sweep of director behaviors that contribute to you as an effective director. So I'm just going to give you a minute to look at this, right? Integrity, number one. Integrity, integrity, integrity. If you say, for example, our directors possess integrity, you're going to get 10s out of 10s. If you say integrity includes independence of mind, solidarity, which is supporting the board decision, confidentiality, which is no leakage, personal and professional brand, do social media searches, and consistency between what you say and what you do, and trustworthiness. When you do that, and then you say who possesses integrity, you get a complete spread. And if someone is conflict-seeking and doesn't possess integrity, they're poison. It's the number one thing that directors look for is integrity, because it can wreck a board. So that's why integrity is up top. And this is exactly what you would expect it to be, but these are not management skills, they're board skills. So communication, teamwork, impact, leadership, intellectual curiosity, capacity to challenge, conscientiousness, duty of care, preparation. These are what director associations all over the world look for. Boardroom conflict. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here. The point is that you can have the best governance in the world, but if you're conflicted, dynamics, behaviors, etc., then you're not going to have a good board. Governance failure, weak oversight functions, weak risk. These are from sporting organizations, by the way. Weak internal controls, tone at the top. I want to give an example of tone at the top right here. This was, do you remember the Canadian idiot on the national news? He was head of the army, or the equivalent title. This was about 6 months ago. And he said, on the national news, I turned to my wife and I said, he's going to be without a job in a week. And sure enough, he didn't have a job in a week. He said, men are pre-programmed to press themselves onto women. Do you remember that comment? I'm going to give you the complete opposite of, and we have a problem in the military and the RCMP for sexual issues. And this is from Australia, but this is an example of tone at the top.
Ongoing investigations into a group of officers and NCOs whose conduct, if proven, has not only brought the Australian Army into disrepute, but has let down every one of you and all of those whose past service has won the respect of our nation. There are limits to how much I can tell you because the investigations into this network by both the New South Wales Police and the ADF Investigative Service are ongoing. But evidence collected to date has identified a group of men within our ranks who have allegedly produced highly inappropriate material, demeaning women, and distributed it across the internet and Defence's email networks. If this is true, then the actions of these members are in direct contravention to every value the Australian Army stands for. By now, I assume you know my attitude to this type of conduct. I have stated categorically many times that the Army has to be an inclusive organisation in which every soldier, man and woman, is able to reach their full potential and is encouraged to do so. Those who think that it is okay to behave in a way that demeans or exploits their colleagues have no place in this army. Our service has been engaged in continuous operations since 1999 and in its longest war ever in Afghanistan. On all operations, female soldiers and officers have proven themselves worthy of the best traditions of the Australian Army. They are vital to us maintaining our capability now and into the future. If that does not suit you, then get out.
I'm not going to play the whole video, but the point here is tone at the top and ethics. And the tone at the top is set by the board and by senior management in terms of what's acceptable and what's not. If you walk by something, the standard that you walk by is the standard that you accept, right? So when directors get into trouble, it's non-financial, it's ethics. It's behavior. Those are the things now that are in play. That's what will grab you. We have digested financial reporting 10 or 15 years ago. What is now in play is non-financial. So I've got audit committee chairs that are calling me that are saying culture, tone in the middle, tone at the bottom. Richard, how do we assess this as directors? What do we do when we see an issue within the organization or within a stakeholder? Interaction, the athlete that I gave earlier, right? How do we measure that? How do we audit that? So we're now moving into non-financial issues for boards. That's what is front and center in the field of governance, and this is just an example. A little more whistleblowing, okay? You should have a whistleblowing program. And it's not run by management. It's an independent person or entity that receives complaints. So this back to the little girl, right? There should be a person or entity that's outside the organization, right? That preserves the anonymity of that phone call and reports up to Shirley, who's chair of the audit committee. This is best practice now, and we're even going to see the Ontario Securities Commission in the next year mandate this for all companies. You have to have an independent, credible whistleblowing program, and surely you're now in play because you're potentially heading up an investigation. Let's say, look at the Canadian Olympic Committee, right? This is an issue that just adversely affects the entire reputation of the organization, right? So what I find is, I hope I have it here, dominant bullying right here, right? Charismatic, high-performing person that there's just no line of sight from the board and from the audit committee. So we're seeing boards and audit committees that are much more assertive in terms of overseeing this non-financial information. Flawed internal investigation and no confidence in it, right? If you're now in play, the sport, you can be on the news that night, right? So it's also crisis management. Dysfunctional behavior, toxic culture, poor crisis management. I want to give you an example of 30 seconds. Let me set it up. Do you remember XL Foods, the mad cow? They faxed, and the complete industry was adversely affected. They didn't even come to the microphone. This was about 2 or 3 years ago. And I actually was brought in to speak to the farmers, the ranchers, they're called. They're in jeans, and they have cowboy hats, and they had chewing tobacco, and there were 40 of them. There wasn't a single woman there. And what actually happened was the cows were coming, and the hose stopped working, and the cows were packaged and sent to the Americans. And people started dying. The same thing happened with Maple Leaf Foods. Imagine you're sitting on a board, and people start dying. People start dying, and you're sitting on the board. This is an example of exemplary crisis management by the CEO of Maple Leaf Foods. It's only about 30 seconds, but it really captures.
You may know Listeria was found in some of our products. Even though Listeria is a bacteria commonly found in many foods and in the environment, we work diligently to eliminate it. When Listeria was discovered in the product, we launched immediate recalls to get it off the shelf. Then we shut the plant down. Tragically, our products have been linked to illnesses and loss of life. To Canadians who are ill and to the families who have lost loved ones, I offer my deepest sympathies. Words cannot begin to express our sadness for your pain. Maple Leaf Foods is 23,000 people who live in a culture of food safety. We have an unwavering commitment to keeping your food safe with standards well beyond regulatory requirements. But this week, our best efforts failed, and we are deeply sorry. This is the toughest situation we've faced in 100 years as a company. We know this has shaken your confidence in us. I commit to you that our actions are guided by putting your interests first.
So assume the worst possible scenario and ask management about crisis planning and crisis procedure. And what do we do when we do hit a crisis? It's too late once the crisis happens, right? Especially with the use of social media now. You're now in play, right? So a lot of this is fire drills and upfront preparation. And the executive directors at the provincial and national level should have media training and be able to be crisis planned. There was one recent company, Via Rail, where I went in. It was after the attempted Al-Qaeda attack, and I said to the board, to the audit committee, who oversees the risks of Via Rail? And they said, well, the audit committee. And I said, okay, well, show me that you now have a procedure in place. There's a terrorist attack at Union Station, 5 o'clock on a Friday. 150 people died. Show me what you've got prepared. And show me that the current CEO at the time has the wherewithal to be able to respond to a crisis in real time, who he didn't. And I ultimately recommended a succession plan. The new CEO does. So the point here is, what is the worst thing that can happen, and are we prepared in terms of a crisis? Reputation risk is a big one for boards, including sporting organizations. This is an example of how to mitigate reputation risk, what it actually looks like. And I'm not suggesting, by the way, that you go overboard in all of this, okay? This is the Cadillac. Ask the question. Have the discussion, right? You don't need this chart. Ask the question, right? Are we prepared for reputation risk? And talk about it. Risk management at the board level is all about priorities and discussions. Speaking up. I'm not going to do this video. And then director conduct, director behaviors, right here. This is an organization that failed because it had directors that didn't have the right behaviors. This is an all-male board that tends to be homogenous, and they all vote the same way because it's groupthink. So one thing women do is they mitigate groupthink on boards. They ask questions, and diverse boards as well. I don't see a lot of diversity, ethnic diversity here. I see some, but not a lot. Look at hockey and look at the Indo-Canadian community. Look at soccer, right? Your future members are not necessarily will look the same as you. So diversity tends to be women, ethnicity, age, geography. I see geography. I see a bit of age. I don't see younger necessarily directors. When I say young, I see some 30s and 40s, not necessarily 50s and 60s. So age diversity. I also am seeing, including on sporting organizations, LGBT now on a matrix. LGBT, lesbian, gay, LGBT, bisexual, and transgender. Why am I looking? I've got a tendency to favor the right, is why I'm looking here. So diversity is important. I want to say a few words on risk just to close, and then we'll open it up for questions. So risk is crucial. Risk governance now is crucial. You should all be talking about risks and having the discussion. And try to get it documented as much as possible. These are best practices. As requested, I did a risk management assessment. I concluded there was no risk of any management. If there's one area regulators are targeting for directors, it's risk right now. And that risk, by the way, in sporting organizations includes sponsorship. It includes pay. It includes non-financial. It includes safety of athletes. It includes sponsorship. These, you should have in your binder the top 10 risks of the organization, and it should be continuous. How are these being monitored? This is not a once-a-year thing, right? This is what some sporting boards do is they do every meeting. Every meeting we're going to have a separate discussion on a particular risk, right? So that we keep on top annually of all of the risks. Okay, I think I'm going to, this is an example of risks. These are the internal controls to mitigate the risks, by the way. And this is a risk register template. This is what it actually looks like. How many people have seen a risk register template? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Within 3 or 4 years, the entire room will go up, okay? This is a huge area that regulators are focusing on. And you know where they're focusing? They're focusing on directors. They're not focusing on managers. I help regulators make the regulation, so I'm on top of this. They are focusing on you. If you want to affect an organization, you focus on the board. Okay, that's it. Oh, strategy. Maybe I'll position the slides and I'll end. This is how to become a strategic board. And you're going to get these slides. I apologize that you don't have them now. That's my fault. They weren't prepared in time. 44, 45, 46, and 47 is all strategy. That's your most important role, by the way, is to approve the strategy of the organization. When you're approving the strategy, every board has a business model. Curling has a business model, right? In fact, I'll say this, then I'll end, is many boards approve the strategic plan, which is fuzzy. It's drafted, not present company excluded, by management. It's a pay. I saw this recently for a huge mining company. That's not a strategic plan, right? A strategic plan is 4 things. It's the strategy, fine, the business model. What is the business model of your curling organization? How do you earn your revenue, right? Show us. So compel the executive directors in the room. Show your board how your organization earns money. 75% of the value of any organization is non-financial. So 75% of your business model should be non-financial. Don't approve the strategy without having a business model. Directors complain, I don't know what the business model is. You haven't asked management to create the business model. And when I talk to managers, many managers say, we've never done it before. Well, how do you know that your business model isn't changing through disruption, through change? How do you know that your business model is not valid? Every strategy has a business model. The business model, so level 1 is the strategy, level 2 is the business model. 3 are the key performance indicators that unpack from the business model. That's how management is compensated. Strategy, business model, KPIs. You do that for you. Once you engage in a discussion as thought partners with staff and management on the business model, it becomes clear to you what their KPIs are. Then you can tailor, it's like a series of taps, the KPIs. The circles in the business model are the key drivers that create the KPIs. To incent management, you want a win-win, right? You want a manager of the provinces or the national to have a salary, but you want to incent to, it's a win-win. You want to drive that person as the board, you approve the pay. You want to, once you have the KPIs, it's much easier to incent that person, to drive, to motivate that person to achieve the strategy. So you're linking strategy to pay. Here's my point. You're linking pay to performance. The strategy, the business model, the KPIs, and the fourth level is risk, which is what we just talked about. What are the risks in achieving the strategy? That's how the activists do it. And they create 3 times the enterprise value of their publicly traded peers. And more public companies now and not-for-profits are implementing this model, which is 50% of our time is discussing strategy. We want 50% of our agenda to be discussing strategy with the CEO of the organization. I've now taught you my entire Harvard course in 45 minutes. There's a bit left, but not much, but you'll get copies of the slides. So let's open it up for, and I know I've hit you with a lot. I've overwhelmed you, likely. But this is where the field is going in terms of issues and best practices. So let's open it up for questions, criticisms, critiques. Yes, sir? What do you think of background checks for board of directors? Yes, very much so. It's happening. If it's not happening, it's a risk. You can do your own background check for your board of directors. I know directors that do it for other directors, right? Because reputational contagion can absolutely impact the organization, right? So it's not only directors, it's senior managers on a prospective basis. So every year you submit, by the way, if something happened in your past, it's okay, right? But explain it so that there's context and there's an issue. I'm even seeing for directors letters of resignation with morals clauses like athletes, right? Something happens, you do something wrong or we miss something, we don't get into a pissing match, we pull the trigger, right? You're off the board. What happens is directors dig in. Something happens in their social media background, et cetera. Yes, I didn't say this, et cetera. And they say, no, I want to stay on the board, right? They get emotional over board positions. So you want to be able to pull the trigger. You lose all of your leverage when you bring the director onto the board. The time to do all of this, what John is suggesting, is before you bring the director onto the board. You can't do it after because you're not fair to the director. So consider doing and you can do your own background checks. You can do background checks with Google alerts, right? It should be a little more rigorous than that, but directors do background checks on each other. Yeah, so this is part of reputational risk. So I'm not suggesting background checks be confined to coaches or to stakeholders or to senior management. It is included in directors. Some boards, I can think of the Scouts, right? They will do a complete background check into you, and they'll have a third party do it. Third parties are experts at doing these types of things. They will, and have an obligation to disclose. Bring forward issues. If you've got an issue in your past, you made a mistake, it happens. Don't not disclose. Do you remember that commercial where the PC candidate, he was urinating, why am I focusing on urination and penises? He was urinating in a coffee cup, and it came to light. Now, I'm not suggesting anybody here, that's the type of thing that will adversely affect your brand. So, long answer to a short question is yes. And I'm not suggesting you have to be paranoid about this, but you have to do some due diligence. Yes, ma'am. I can't see your first name. John, and then Janie. Hi, Janie.
Hi. You spoke about gender, having people on the gender. Do you feel it has to be mandated that it's 50-50 or 60-40 or what have you? Or can it just be simply that you have to have at least one of each gender on the board? Because I look around this room, we have 14 member associations. Yep. 7 of them have female.
Yes.
But I know in my jurisdiction, and I believe it's similar in the others, it's not mandated.
Yeah.
But I believe that there are a number of very strong women around this table.
Yep.
So do you believe it needs to be mandated that it's 50%?
No, where we're going is we see inadequate progress, present company excluded. We're going to push you a little more. They're calling it a target of 30%. So I'm not suggesting quotas or anything. I do want to, and I noticed Northwest Territories, Aboriginal. You know, you Aboriginal on matrices. This is landing on here's my point. Your diversity of your board and your staff should match your actual location, your geography. So curling in Northern Ontario might be very different from curling in Northwest Territories, from curling in Alberta, for example. So attempt to match with align, right? So I'm also saying it's more than gender, right? But the 4 or 5 touch points for diversity you should be thinking about this, right? When you're recruiting. That's my point. And I'm against sort of mandating this, certainly 50-50, but some provinces have done it. Quebec said a few years ago, we want the 50% women. Look at Trudeau, right? Look at Wynne. She said 40% in the cabinet yesterday. Look at Trudeau, 50%. So the leaders, the political leaders, and I've advised Wynne to do this as well, lead by example, right? Lead by example to show that this can be done, because otherwise, what women don't want is to be waiting, another 20, 30 years and not much happens. This, I'm pleasantly surprised, actually. You are very good at gender and other types of diversity. So that, I don't often see that. So pat yourself on the back. Do you have another point?
I do,
Yeah.
and I'm glad you said it shouldn't be mandated, because one of the things that you did say was that the board needs to be comprised of people who are competent. And I don't feel that it should be said it has to be 50-50.
Yeah.
It should be by who is the most competent person there. And
Yeah.
as a female, I am offended when people say we have to have something that is 50% female.
Yeah, agree. It should be, competency should be the primary driver. Very well said, Julie. Good point. Janie, sorry. I just turned 50 and I begin a sentence, and by the time I get to the end of the sentence, I completely forgot what the beginning of the sentence was. So I apologize. Janie. Other questions before we break? I was told that we need to break at 10:30, but I think we'll go over for two more questions and then we'll end. Scott and then Paul. Or Paul and then Scott. Doesn't matter.
A lot of us are in the situation where our board is constituted from regions. So we don't really have any control over who that board member is. So it's really the regions or group of regions select the person, and it's usually whoever put their hand up last. And so I'm just wondering, do you find that fundamentally flawed?
Yes. You get who you get, and that's you can wreck a board like that. Because the region might be putting forward a special purpose director, or the person who puts the hand up might not be the person that ultimately you wish to select. So I'm not seeing that. That is not a good, I'm not suggesting it's not working, mind you, okay? I'm saying you should have the national board should have some influence over the selection of directors. And I'm seeing more and more national boards now using the competency matrix and saying to the different regions, listen, we respect your right to nominate a particular director. We would like you to give consideration to the following. So you have some sort of a marriage there, as opposed to you get who you get, right? That's not to say that the people who are appointed are not qualified at all. Show us that you possess these various skills, because you know your board best. You know your board best. So it's completely appropriate for a board to have influence over the selection of directors. In the real world, it's the complete opposite. In everything other than sport and not-for-profit, in the publicly traded companies, shareholders, owners don't have any say in terms of directors, right? The board selects the directors, not the owners. Owners don't select directors. In fact, that's one of the issues in the real world, is that owners want more of a say. So owners here have a huge say, right? And I would say too much of a say. I'd say the board has to rein it in a bit and say, listen, we want competency, we want behaviors, here's what you should possess, give us your resumes, right? Or show us that you've undertaken a due diligent process. And it's not, the person who puts up their hand and wants to do the job. You want to make sure that the person fits within the existing. It's like creating a hockey team. It's like creating a curling team, right? You want to see the chemistry, the behaviors, the independence. So I would encourage you to adopt these types of best practices that are widely regarded for not-for-profit organizations to influence the selection of director. That's not a bad thing. You're not taking over the regions. You're doing what you should be doing as a national board. Good question. Last point, Paul, and then we'll end.
Yeah, I was wondering whether you could comment on the role of self-assessment of competencies.
So you can do a rigorous, self is nice, but it's largely irrelevant, right? You could do, unless you do the scale properly. You want to define your competencies, but there tends to be, if you don't design it properly, you get a lot of inflation. I see gender inflation too. I see men overconfident and women underconfident. What you want is to balance that self-assessment with a peer assessment. And the self, if you're going to do self, you know a gentle way of doing peer is the chair of the board, the chair of the governance committee, and maybe a staff person has a meeting where the person who did the self-assessment will come in, they'll present their resume, not short bio, by the way. Short bio is manipulative. I'm using strong words. It's self-serving. There's no internal controls. Resume. Regulators now are asking for resumes of directors. I never would have predicted this. Resumes, not short bios, and they're conducting interviews to see if you're fit for purpose. So you bring your resume to the meeting. You have 3 of your peers, and you justify your rating of the various 10 competencies. That is a form of interactive peer dialogue. So it's a baby step between self, which is, here's what I think, and full peer, where you all assess each other. A baby step is you get there slowly. If you've never done this before, start with self. Start with self, then move to a baby step, and then move to peer. And do this over 2 or 3 years. Governance is baby steps. This is not 6 months, 12 months. This is introducing some key concepts, competency, peer assessment. It's going to take time, and do it thoughtfully. Okay, well, I'm exhausted. I've given you my. I hope it was helpful for you, and I thoroughly enjoyed coming and teaching you, and I hope it was helpful. Call on me anytime. I think my email's here if you have any questions whatsoever, or Kathy can direct any emails my way, and please buy my book. Okay? Thanks, everybody.